Surveys suggest a high number of adults think about the Roman Empire every single day. Yet when we imagine the end of that civilization, we usually focus on one specific dramatized date, the year 476 CE. We picture a sudden, violent apocalypse, hordes of barbarians breaching the gates and destroying the eternal city, causing civilization to vanish overnight. But that sudden collapse is a myth, fueled largely by the propaganda of surviving elites. Take the story of Emperor Nero playing the fiddle while Rome burned. In reality, the fiddle hadn't been invented yet, and records show Nero was 30 miles away organizing relief efforts. The wealthy patrician class simply despised his tax reforms and wrote him into history as a tyrant to protect their own interests. The events of 476 CE were similar. When the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, surrendered his crown, he wasn't handing over a functioning superpower. He was surrendering an empty office. The Roman state had been decaying internally for more than 2 centuries. Empires of this magnitude do not evaporate, they mutate. If Rome didn't actually fall, how did its massive societal structure transform into the medieval world? The dismantling of the Roman state was driven by terrible monetary policy rather than military defeat. By the 3rd century, the government could no longer afford the unsustainable cost of its massive, multi-continental military. To pay the soldiers, emperors began debasing the silver denarius. They reduced the amount of precious metal in each coin, mixing in cheaper copper and lead so they could mint more currency from the same amount of silver. As silver content dropped toward zero, inflation spiked. Merchants refused the worthless currency, killing long-distance trade. Without food supplies, citizens abandoned starving cities.
This map shows the population fleeing to the countryside, seeking security on localized agricultural estates to grow their own food. The empire didn't lose its people to slaughter. It lost them to a localized survival strategy. The centralized system failed, so the population retreated into self-sufficiency. In a desperate attempt at triage, emperors Diocletian and Constantine eventually divided the empire into 2 manageable halves. The East was granted the most lucrative trade routes, the wealthiest cities, and a stable, high-quality gold coin called the solidus. This kept their economy functioning, while the other half struggled. The West was left with depleted tax revenues and thousands of miles of vulnerable borders. To defend them, the government was forced to hire Germanic mercenaries, essentially outsourcing the empire's security. Eventually, those mercenaries realized they held the military power and began claiming local territories for themselves. By the time the official Western emperor was deposed in 476, most rural peasants wouldn't have noticed a difference in their daily lives. The split didn't save the West. It merely allowed the East to survive while the Western half abandoned imperial administration in favor of warlord protection. The medieval world was simply the Roman hierarchy adapting to a new, localized reality. The wealthy Roman elites who owned the large rural estates transitioned directly into the role of medieval lords and dukes. The lower class underwent a similar change. Roman tenant farmers lost their remaining rights and became serfs, laborers bound to the earth who traded their freedom for the lord's military protection. This created the manor system, a self-sufficient economic unit. Each manor produced its own food and tools, allowing society to function without any external trade or centralized government. As the secular state vanished, the Christian church stepped into the administrative vacuum. Bishops and popes became the new unifying authorities, managing charity and arbitrating legal disputes. In the countryside, isolated monks took on the role of the empire's archivists. They spent their lives copying manuscripts to ensure that Roman law and classical knowledge survived the fragmentation of the state. This manuscript illustrates how the Roman hierarchy survived. The secular crown was shattered, but the structure of the empire was preserved through a feudal system governed by spiritual authority. While the West fragmented, the eastern half of the Roman Empire remained a unified geopolitical power. We know them as the Byzantine Empire. In the 7th century, under Emperor Heraclius, the East mobilized a professional military to wage a decades-long war against the Persian Empire, proving its continued status as a global superpower. Constantinople survived because of massive fortifications. The Theodosian walls physically shielded the Roman administration and its wealth from invasions that fractured the West. Behind these walls, the centralized tax bureaucracy and Roman legal